Okay, thank you, Carsten. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Society of Economic Botany student event. Thank you very much for coming to today's talk on, which I wrote down and then lost because I can't remember. It's a long title. The COVID pandemic's effect on access to fieldwork in ethnobotany and what it means for students. So if you want to, make sure you or try and switch to speaker view so you can always see who's speaking at the time. I'm Kim Walker. I'm a member of the Society for Economic Botany, or we'll just call it SEB for now, SEB Student Council. I'm a PhD student. Actually, I don't really do ethnobotany, but I work in economic botany on the history of medicines. And I'm on the council with Carsten, so we thought we'd have a little think about student events that would be of interest. And after listening to lots of other students about their experiences at the moment of having to rejig, completely rethink about their field work, we thought this would be a fantastic event. So we had a good think about who we'd love to hear from. We've invited a really distinguished panel today. So I'll talk about that in a second. But I think some of you are members of the Society for Economic Botany, but if you're not, I would warmly invite you to join us. I'll put a link in the chat below. It's only $10 to $30 a year and gives you access to Economic Botany Journal, also gives you conference discounts and bursaries for attendance at conferences, and I believe it's Jamaica 2022, which sounds great. So if you'd like to come along to that, then it's a good $10 to $30 spent. You also get access to funding and awards through the society, and access to members-only events and panels such as this, though we did keep it open today for the public just because we thought it's such a nice subject to share. We also have a student blog, so if you fancy writing about your research or experiences, we'd love to invite you to submit blogs. I'll also put that link in the chat box below. So yeah, I'll put the two links in below, the membership one and the blog one. So that's a bit about the SEB. It's just a great network of people, great for networking, great for learning from different people. I know I've enjoyed being a member here. But without further ado, let's get on to the event of today. So we're really pleased to be welcoming this amazing panel from a wide range of disciplines, from ethnoecology to ethnobotany, from all over the world, wide ranging as Barbados to New Zealand, focusing on food to medicine, and people with experience in fieldwork and laboratory work. And the panel is going to be run, and in fact, the person that's done most of the organisation today is Carsten Peter. Thank you very much, Carsten. I've barely done anything compared to you. Who's a PhD, but Carsten is a PhD student from the University of Ljubljana and our student rep at the Society. And he's a really fantastic and nice guy. So if you have any questions, you can always email him. He will be taking the panel. But I guess just a couple of things. We're going to go through hearing the people today, but if you want to ask a question, put it in the chat box below. And if you'd like to say it yourself, you can always raise your hand. There's a little option to raise a hand if you want to speak it, but it is going to be recorded today. So if you'd rather stay anonymous, leave it in the chat box. But thank you very much for coming once again. Over to you, Carsten.
Yeah, thank you, Kim. And Kim is being overly modest. This whole thing was actually her idea, and she picked out our star cast today. So ignore what she said. But yeah, we're very pleased to have all of you here today. Just an additional note on comment or questions. Please save your comments for the end. We will have a question period. So first, we're going to let each of the speakers introduce themselves and their thoughts on the topic, with each of them taking about 10 minutes for it. Then we'll have a panel discussion lasting for a while, and then questions will be at the end. So yeah, please do save those until then if possible. So we'll hop right into it, and we'll ask Sonia to start off.
Great, thank you, Carsten. First of all, I want to welcome everyone, the members of the panel. I then want to congratulate the SCB student body on this effort. And I was going to give my main congrats. He has acted like the communication specialist, and I'm happy that he is letting us know that Kim had a big hand in the groundwork as well. I mean, I think the topic for discussion, and again, I always have to look back at it as well. COVID-19 access to field work and impact on students. I think all of us working in the same field really know that the impact has been at myriad levels. From my perspective, I can let you know that I founded the Biocultural Education and Research Program in 2017, and we really started our work outreach community efforts in 2018. And I would say that our work is very new, and COVID has really blunted our work program. And I know that is the same for everyone in this field. Also within the Center for Food Security and Entrepreneurship at the West Indies Capeville campus here. And our program is to let our communities understand the importance of our indigenous food resources that we have here. And this came into very significant vision, if I can say, of course, when we locked down and there was panic about where we're going to get our food resources. And it was seen by those long lines globally. And it really struck me and really indicated the importance of the work we do collectively. What has heartened me, I will say, is the speed with which our scientists generally and ethnos and others in the field have responded to these new challenges. And in, looking at global opinion on this issue, I came across published from as early as May of 2020 towards the end of the year. And members on this panel, I do believe, were in the forefront in producing a paper where they voiced their opinions about where ethnobotany can go and that we're doing and make more of an impact in terms of empowering our community. I also found a lot of key resources, which I will share as we continue our discussion. And there was a viewpoint that I came across, which looked at resuming field research in pandemic. And I just want to quote some of their summary, which I think is so timely in terms of speaking to the challenges. And I'm quoting, of course, these are the things that I agree with, that resonate with me, and I know will resonate with the panel, but it's important to indicate where our information is coming from. And it said that restarting scientific research in the next months and years will be an enormous logistical and ethical challenge. And these are ideas that I'd like us to discuss as we continue today. However, and this is something that I am doing from my personal end, there's research in labs and libraries and international archives or museums of our data sets before we can resume field research. And, it has been a shock to all of us. I am a bit surprised at the variability in the human response. But I know that we can be creative and innovative in reaching out to our target publics and continuing our work in as, again, innovative ways as we can. So I'll pass it on from here.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Sonia. Now we'll go to Cassandra, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and then hopping into your views on this.
Great. Well, first, I want to thank the committee for organizing this and for including me in this panel discussion. This is such an important topic right now for our students. I think that, well, first, let me give you background on myself. So I'm an associate professor of dermatology and human health. So I'm actually situated in a medical school in the US at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. And my research interests are in the domains of medical ethnobotany and also drug discovery from plants. So looking for novel anti-infectives from traditional medicines used in the treatment of infectious and inflammatory disease. And so as an infectious disease, COVID has been something that's really been revealing to us in terms of how people deal with threats, with medical threats that we don't yet have solutions for, especially in the earliest periods of the pandemic. Some of the things that became very clear to me early on is that people were rapidly turning to nature, looking to traditional remedies within their own cultures to help to manage symptoms. And it's a unique time in the world where we have, of course, a lot of loss of knowledge on how these remedies work, or which plants are best suited to different the management of different symptoms. But we're also faced with great biodiversity loss. The Q report that came out for 2020 in the State of the World's Plants showed that 2 in 5 plants is threatened with risk of extinction. And so I think as ethnobotanists, we sit at a really unique perspective because we're really looking at that interface between the engagement of people and nature. And I think that COVID has revealed that there is an urgent need for more scientific study in this realm to better understand how people are going to use these resources as medicine. And also, what does this mean in terms of sustainable management of wild plants used as medicines? What does this mean when it comes to trade? We know in the US, the sales of dietary supplements, and many of these ingredients, by the way, are not cultivated. There are many examples of ingredients that are also wildcrafted. Sales have gone through the roof during this period. And so what impact does that have not only on local plant populations, but also on local peoples and their economies, and the sustainability for future harvest or future collection of those species? So I think that, yes, while there are a number of significant challenges, and I'll echo what Dr. Peters mentioned about the perspective article that was pulled together by Ina Vanderbroek on, and had many collaborators from across the globe that wrote about this. There are a number of opportunities. There are also significant barriers that we're going to have to work through as well. But I think if there ever was a time that highlights the importance of the field in general, the field of ethnobotany, now is it.
All right, great. Thank you very much. We'll hop over to Renata now. So if you could introduce yourself and then jump into your opinions on the matter.
Hello to everyone. Well, I'm associate professor at Ka University. Official title should be in botany, but I usually say in ethnobotany. But my field actually lies somewhere between semiotics and ethnobotany. So I study wildfood plants, medicinal plants, but also the relations between plants of people from the semiotic perspective. So more of ecosemiotic approach. And right now I'm leading a RC grant. So we are in the middle of quite big research. We caught by COVID in our third year of research. It was a bit too early. We still had few field works to do, but now we have to go with it. Nevertheless, one of my students is right now in the field in Russia. However, she lives in one family. She's just observing the life of one family in order to avoid the high risk. So ethically, it's very hard decision for me, especially was to let her go, but she had no choice. And our university had the policy right now that the student career is very short. So they need some times to take the chance. and go to the field or go to another university to study, keeping all the precautions means. However, my team, and actually I started to work with online sources or gathering ethnobotanical information through online interviews or questionnaires already years ago. So it's maybe the transition for me has been a bit easier, and also in the recent paper we did with quite a number of collaborators all over the globe, which was documenting the use of medicinal plants for COVID response, the very first rapid response collection led by Andrea Pieroni, was from our side done through the internet discussion forum analysis. So it's quite a wide platform from which we can see, of course, not with classical ethnobotanical methods. So we cannot identify maybe plants 100%, but excuse me. Sorry, I'm working from home.
I'll just pipe in and say this is a challenge that many of us that have families at home are facing. I've banished all of my children are banished to their rooms right now because I don't want any interruption. I understand exactly.
Well, this has not yet happened actually so far, but usually they know I work during the work times, but this is now, it's like 6:30 and they are not used to that. So, okay, so I really thank you, Cassie, for jumping in. So I really encourage you to research the possibility to look for various internet, for various options that are there in internet. I can share some articles we already have published based on internet, and if you're interested, you can ask specific questions. And also, given the time, there have been already 3 or 4 students of mine who have been doing research internet-based. So this is the most ethical choice right now. And of course, I agree with Sonia 100%. There are archives, there are literature sources which can and need to be explored. There is a lot of work to do, and I think that working keeps us sane during this time. And we really need to save our elders as much as we can, not going out and spreading potentially the virus until we have the vaccine in force for everyone. So thank you very much. I'm open for the questions.
Well, we'll do questions at the end, but thank you for your introduction and your views. I will underline what you just mentioned about the internet to everyone, especially since most of us in the student population are in the generation where we're now the first generation growing up with the internet. So this is definitely something that's going to be interesting for all of us to look at going forwards. Now, if we could jump to Nancy for your introduction and for your views.
Okay, thank you so much, Karsten and Kim, and all of you who have thought about this, conceived the idea, and organized it. It's a privilege for me to be here with all of you and with these amazing colleagues. I I've been a member of the Society for Economic Botany since before most of you were born, back in I believe 67. And actually, I noticed that the society was founded on the year of my birth, 1947. So, and I was fortunate to have had really strong support from people like Richard Schultes, who I wrote to as an undergraduate student and who wrote back to me and provided, in those days, hard copy reprints of his papers. And so during that time, so much has changed, but some things have remained the same. The relationships that you develop in doing this work, and depending on the stage that you're in your research, there's such a broad range of different approaches that you can take to contribute in this field. And certainly learning from experts, indigenous plant experts or other experts, face-to-face, firsthand in indigenous communities or other communities around the world is a really important part of economic botany and ethnobotany fieldwork. But it's as you've mentioned, with the internet available, not to mention telephones, in many cases, it's possible to keep in touch and to continue developing those relationships with people and learning from them, even from a distance. And for example, one of my dear friends and teachers, Helen Clifton from the Gitgat community of Hartley Bay on the North Coast, is now 96 years old. I just phoned her the other day and had a good conversation with her. And she just got a COVID vaccination last week as well. So those are, I think, what we do in economic botany, at least my feeling about the field is that we're trying to serve other people through our research. We're trying to find ways to conserve plants, to help people, and to teach and to inform. So all of those things can be done in multiples of ways. And another part of economic botany is experimental. And you can still undertake various kinds of experiments on plants growing, not to mention the laboratory work that some people are very interested in and that contribute to the field in a lot of ways. So all of these things, from archaeobotany and some limited things that you can do in the field, to work that you can do online and the papers and literature that you can access that way, to this kind of distance communication. All of these are possible, and all of them you can develop a really viable research project around that can begin a really valuable career that in the future will hopefully include a lot more face-to-face contact with others. But for right now, there are all kinds of other options that you can access. So I'll leave it at that, I think, and looking forward very much to the next speaker, Priscilla, who I've known for many years now.
Great, thank you, Nancy. And yeah, as you said, Priscilla, if we could hear from you now, that would be great.
Kia ora koutou, and thank you, Nancy, and hi, everybody. He mihi nui kia tātou katoa, hui hui mai nei. It's a real pleasure to be here, and thank you, Karsten, and thank you, Kim, for inviting me to speak. I wanted to start with what we call a whakatauki here in New Zealand, which is a saying that's been passed on through ancestral lines. So it's a very old saying, and I'll read it to you in Maori first, which is the Indigenous language here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and then I'll talk about it a little bit in English. So it says, ko te pai tāwhiti whaia kia tata, ko te pai tata whakamaua kia tina. And what that means is, it translates to say, seek out distant horizons and cherish those that you attain. So yeah, shoot for the stars, but really be thankful and acknowledge all of the things, all of the steps that you take as you move towards a distant goal, because sometimes, as with COVID, those goals can seem very distant, and yet every small step that we take now actually creates a positive energy or a positive step as we go on our journey. So in thinking about that, I'm thinking about things like self-care as well. So the need to look after yourself first, that's a really important step on your journey as a student. And so absolutely critical that that you are feeling strong and well as you go into whatever work you'll do. And if you are looking after yourself, then that will enable you to think more clearly about what you might do next. I don't want to talk too much about myself to start. I've got a website though for those of you that are interested. So you can Google me on Priscilla Wehi at Scientific Journeys. But I do a range of things, and I work a lot with language and biodiversity. I'm really interested in the kinds of ecology and the kinds of knowledge that are represented in language. And so for me, that's been a really productive area, and that's something that you can work on both closely with communities, but also, as Nancy and some of the other speakers have said, through archives, including digital archives. So there are many different ways of thinking about knowledge and knowledge systems and how they're embedded in language. And we can do that both remotely and in person. One of the things that's a little bit different, or there are a few different things about how COVID has been for us here in New Zealand. So one of the things was that prior to COVID, we actually had a really big measles epidemic in the Pacific, and in particular in Samoa, that took the lives of many children. And I think, having experience, we have a very large Samoan and Pacifica population here in New Zealand. And we also have a long history of previous epidemics, like the 1918 flu epidemic, which took many Indigenous lives. And so there's been quite high awareness of the need to respond quickly and strongly as a community to protect people right across our society. So the Samoan epidemic with children there was absolutely terrible. There were about 90 children who died, and that came immediately before COVID. And it also actually raised some really interesting questions for us around communication with communities. And I think that this is one of the strengths that we have as ethnobiologists, is that we often work in partnership with communities in our work. And we develop a lot of communication skills. And those kind of partnerships and communication is absolutely critical in how we go forward, both in dealing with COVID and in our future work. And learning how to communicate and to do that well, those are things that we can still think about and improve our practice, even though we're not necessarily working face-to-face with our communities. So there are lots of ways that we can practice our writing. So how would you translate your work into lay language, for example, so you could write popular articles or pieces that might communicate your work to communities that you're trying to reach. There's lots of ways that we can improve our communication even though we can't or might not want to be face-to-face with community people because of the risks. The other thing I think that our prior experience with the measles epidemic did was it taught us a lot about the relationship that we have with science. And I think ethnobiology has a really important role here in terms of both drawing from the strength of the community in managing symptoms, but also being clear about how other epidemiological knowledges can contribute, and how it's really important to understand things like how COVID is transmitted, for example. Because one of the things that came out of that measles epidemic was that many children in Samoa weren't vaccinated because there'd been a previous poor experience with vaccination in those communities, and so people had stopped vaccinating and had returned to traditional medicines, not just to manage symptoms, but also thinking that that was a way that their children wouldn't catch measles. So I think we've got real responsibilities, you know, during this time. One of the other things that's come up here with COVID is, and with some of the students I have, is that, you know, we do work closely with communities as a general pattern in ethnobiology. And what we've seen is that COVID has really highlighted all of the inequities, and that the concerns of communities have changed. So, for example, food sovereignty has become a really big issue here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, even more so than before. So communities thinking about how they can feed themselves, and all of that kind of having access to good food. So there are ways that as ethnobiologists we can say, okay, maybe the topic that I was thinking of working on before, maybe I can tweak my topic, or maybe I can think about how I can support community aspirations now in terms of the things that I see are important to my community. So there may be things in your community where you see that there's actually a critical need, and that if you take a different view on the topic that you're hoping to study, that this might actually work really well in terms of community aspirations. I just want to finish by giving you an example as well of something that we've done. So we've had a real focus on, even despite a relatively short lockdown here in New Zealand, we had a 4-week hard lockdown where the only thing we could do was go and exercise or go to the supermarket or to the doctor. So even things like dentists were closed, and there were no takeaways and so on. So it was really emergency care and food, that was it. And then we went into a slightly less hard lockdown where we could buy takeaways. And we've come out with, currently we've got no COVID in the community at all. But nevertheless, the whole experience with the lockdowns has changed the way that we think. And a lot of our students, so it took a long time for field work to come back. And it was in our autumn or summer and autumn, where people were often out and about and suddenly had to stop. And so what we've got our students to do are a lot of things like planning, thinking about how they would work with data, meta-analysis, that kind of thing. Thinking here in New Zealand, face-to-face research is really important. So if you already have relationships with your community, as Nancy said, I think you can continue through Zoom and other ways like that. But I think to create relationships, if you're at the beginning of that journey, it's really a difficult thing to do if you're not face-to-face, at least here in New Zealand. But I'll just talk briefly about a project we've got as an example. So I had a postdoc actually working on Indigenous perceptions and perspectives around Antarctic research. And so we can't get there. And it's very difficult to get to Antarctica. And now our Antarctic program has been essentially shut down for at least the next year. And so one of the things that we've done is we've spent a lot of time reimagining relationship with Antarctica. So we're centering Indigenous frameworks and philosophical frameworks and how we might think about the research that's previously been done. And so we've done literature searching. We're looking at policy documents to see what kind of philosophical frameworks those policy documents represent. We've spent quite a lot of time designing communications materials and creating a website and having an online Zoom seminar series. So there are ways that, you know, so my postdoc hasn't been to Antarctica, I've never been to Scott Base, and yet we've managed to create a lovely research space, bringing in things like the history of whales, so Māori relationships with whales, thinking about Indigenous relationships, using the archives, by thinking about Indigenous data sources that are published already, that may be online. So there's lots of ways that we've created this space, instead of thinking totally about so what I'd call conventional scientific frameworks. We've actually extended that into history and into language and into policy and a whole lot of areas that we probably wouldn't have gone if circumstances had been different. So I'd encourage you to think about digital archives and not just perhaps analysing text, which is something I do with language, but also policy documents and other things like that, where you can really start thinking about what you could bring to your community, the community that you work with, that perhaps you wouldn't have done before COVID. So I'll just leave it there, but yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you, Priscilla. And yeah, as I'm sure you all know, New Zealand has really been the gold standard for COVID responses. So we're really glad to have you here with us. I'll just pick up on what you mentioned about archival and textual sources, and we've touched on it a few times before. Obviously, for us as students, this can also be something that's very beneficial even beyond COVID, especially if we're having issues with funding, for example. This is a really good way that you can do your research on a very tight budget. So really, this is something to keep in mind from multiple perspectives. So we've reached the end of our panelists introducing themselves quite quickly, actually. So we're ahead of schedule, which is great. If any of you have anything you would like to say in response to any of the other panelists, I'd like us to hop into that now.
Yeah, I just wanted to support what Priscilla was saying about the importance of text and language. And there are many different resources out there that you can access from literature or from oral sources on the web or whatever. But I think that's work that you can do to some extent from a distance. And you can build up your knowledge base so that at a time when you are able to, again, work with individuals one-on-one or face-to-face, you can contribute more by having done that background research and understanding of language and so forth.
Wonderful, thank you. Oh, yeah, Sonia, would you like to say something? Oh, you're muted. There, thank you.
Yeah, I just, like, Nancy wanted to thank Priscilla for encapsulating those great ideas. And I came across, sorry, a very useful document on adapting research methodology in the COVID-19 pandemic. It's lodged at the University of Washington, their lab. And I can share that resource, but they've made a special effort to outline different methods that students can employ in both qualitative and semi-quantitative research. I'll just give them here: ethnography, literary anthropology, focus group diaries, which I see that cropping up more and more, where you work with your people that you have created intimate relationships with. You can't be there, but they can keep diaries and you can communicate with that content. Ethnographic videos, art-based research, online phone surveys, digital methodologies. For each of these types of research, they've been very good to give a number of resources, literature resources, links to museums and other data resources. So I will share that with them so students can have a look there. I think that's a really great resource.
Great, thank you. And for those of you who haven't checked yet, if you open up your chat box, everyone is sharing all sorts of wonderful links and sources with you. So please do take a way to check those out. Or that didn't come up properly. Take the time to check those out. Do any of our other panel members have anything they'd like to add on that topic?
Kim here. If I just say, if anybody's shy about asking a question, also feel free to type it in the chat box and we can ask it for you. And if you want to be anonymous, you can message me or Carsten directly and we can just read it out for you anonymously if you're a bit shy.
Yeah, we'll be moving into the questions in a bit, but just so you all know, the video is being recorded. So again, if you don't want to be recorded, please do type your question either in publicly or to myself or to Kim. And if one of us doesn't see it and you send it privately, just spam us with it until we do see it. Now we're going to hop into a few questions that we've, oh, Renata, yes, go ahead, thank you.
I just want to, go ahead you, then I will do.
You go, Renata.
Okay. So I just wanted to add to the archive subject because I'm coming from archives. So I started my ethnobotanical career from archives, working on Estonian archival sources. And this is a never-ending field, but you really need to have a background to interpret them. So just a warning, don't jump on historical sources without having studied a bit at least as the historical context you are going to work, and or involve someone who has experience. Involve a historian, involve someone from other field. Do not hesitate, ask for help, because there are aspects of different works which we may not master everyone perfectly or even not enough to interpret. For historical texts, it might be very difficult. And I will put 2 articles we just finished last year before COVID, though, but based on interpretation of historical sources with which usually no one really want to go deeply in, and this creates mistakes. So historical sources are perfect way also to help communities to understand why things are as they are, but we need to master the methods for working with them. Sorry.
Thank you. Priscilla, really quick before you
agree. Yeah, I'd just like to say I do agree with that. I think it is, but this is a perfect opportunity to master or to explore learning new skills. This is a great time to do that. And I'd also add that learning more quantitative skills is another way of thinking about some of the archives as well. Even in terms of a lot of museums and a lot of herbaria have also digitized specimens, for example. And if you have quantitative skills, you can do all sorts of things. So, for example, looking at biases or within collections, or what digitized collections might favor in putting online. There are all sorts of different questions that you can ask around inequity or different purposes of plants, for example. many different questions. So building up a skill base that you can use to explore some of those things is incredibly valuable. And I think that the whole idea too about whatever data you find or you have, putting it in context, either through specialist, working with specialist historians or specialist people in your community. This is where the community is so important in guiding the research. And the other thing I'd add in regard to that is we've found during COVID a lot of our people who have previously not bothered with the internet much at all are now all on Zoom calls. We've had lots and lots of elders now who have taken to Zoom with great relish. So that's actually one positive that's come out of COVID, that now we can be a lot more connected, and people who previously would never have done it are actually coming and engaging in conversations. So I think, you know, there's hope in terms of how we adapt, how we live and what we do, and that can also have wonderful downstream benefits if we've got a little bit of patience to kind of develop those relationships first and do those things.
Wonderful, thank you. I'd just like to quickly bring our attention back to something Renata said about needing to collaborate sometimes with people from different disciplines, especially for all of you as students. This is why we have a student council, to help you do your research, become researchers, or wherever you're going to go in your careers. So for example, if a lot of historical resources you can't access due to linguistic issues, for example, maybe you don't read, I don't know, Italian, and you need someone who can speak Italian, feel free to get in touch with us at the Society, because there are other student members and other grown-up members that we can put you in touch with to help you as well. So never be afraid to reach out, because that's exactly what we're here for. Now we're going to jump into some questions that we have prepared for the panel members. Our first one is, have there been other times in your ethnobotanical or botanical fieldwork in the past when you've had to change your plans and do things differently than you had originally anticipated? What challenges or even potential opportunities can this bring with us? I will also copy and paste the question into the chat box so everyone can look at it and keep it in mind as we discuss this. Would anyone like to start us off on this?
I can start with that. So a little bit more context on my background. In addition to being a mom of 3 plus a nephew that I'm also raising, so it's really 4 at home, I also am an amputee. I'm disabled. And so I've had to deal with different challenges in the field than others might have to face, especially when trying to reach more difficult or physically difficult to reach sites, whether in collecting plants or hiking up to higher elevation to the location of different villages. So I think that this is something I've dealt with for a very long time. And whatever the challenge, whether it's sorting out how to balance family while in the field, or sorting out how to reach different locations for interviews or for plant collections, one thing has held true, and it's careful planning. It sounds so simple, right? Careful planning, but really, if you put in the effort to really think about what are the potential barriers that you might face, and really carefully, creatively, because in many cases we're on a very tight budget when you're in the field, is carefully and creatively think about how to address those challenges. And this needs to happen well before you ever reach your field site in some cases, because you should think about this from the perspective of also when you're writing those grant applications and budgeting out how much is needed for lodging or how much is needed for transportation. For example, I often will hire a team of mules or donkeys to carry me and my kids and all my plants up and down the mountain. But that takes money, and that takes, to pay for the local rental and work with local people to pay for those services. So I would just say that's my biggest piece of advice. And I think we'll face this also going into fieldwork post-COVID, especially depending on how well distributed vaccines will be in many of the places that we work, is careful planning, not only for your own safety, but obviously really, really carefully planning for the safety of anyone that you interact with or collaborate with in the field. So yeah, sounds simple, but it actually really, really works to plan carefully.
No, thank you. That's a good one. I can't count the number of times I found myself on the edge of a cliff and realized I should have planned my route beforehand. Does anyone else have something they'd like to add for this question?
I'll just jump in with one personal experience that I've had, and I also have three children now grown up, and lots of grandchildren, at least 5 now. But doing field work, of course, when you have children, it creates its own set of, I guess, challenges and issues. But so one of the things that I sort of encountered was, well, being pregnant while I was trying to do field work, not feeling too well, and then having a young baby or more, and bringing them along with me to do field work. And that actually opened many doors that I never would have expected. But everywhere you go, people love babies and children. And if anything, it created an opportunity for me to learn about medicines that people would take around childbirth, or things that you do with new babies that I never would have even thought to ask about before. So often when you are presented with challenges, they can actually be very positive in the end.
No, absolutely. I want to echo Nancy's comment there, because similarly, I learned so much more about childcare and plants used specifically for children, even in rituals, for protective amulets and things like that. But also, I think in my own situation, I interview people a lot about medical problems and infections and ailments and pain. And in a way, that's my own personal challenge, but it's also been a great way of connecting with the people I work with. And I think that there's an advantage to that as well.
Well, I can only add my experience with the same 3 kids. And but however, I would also encourage you to sometimes make a quick decisions of the changes, because well, we never know where life brings us and what is happening. So you sometimes need to change the plans on the go and well, be responsible for consequences. But as I'm coming from a bit different background from the semiotics, so I usually, or I used to before at least, to build all my research based on the data I already have. So I didn't really go to the field with hypotheses. So it's also quite valuable knowledge to learn or to master the way of looking to the data from the different perspective, to the data you already have. And it can really help you forward in unexpected situations as well. So.
Kia ora. One of the things I'd just like to add is how important it is to listen to your community. You know, COVID's been tough for everybody, and I know it is really tough for a lot of our students. But a lot of the communities that I work with are often, you know, they're disadvantaged in many ways, and the concerns that are now at the forefront of their minds may have changed, or probably have changed. And so there are things that perhaps they would have loved to have discussed with you 6 months ago, but now perhaps the energy is quite different. They may have low energy, and very different concerns. And so as researchers, one of the things I think that we have to do if we want to do ethical research is to listen to our community and think about what their priorities are. And if you as a researcher, as a student growing into being a researcher, if you can adapt your research and learn to listen so that you really are working in partnership with your community, I think not only will your data be much richer and your relationships, but you will have contributed much more positively in terms of how we all go forward. So yeah, make sure that you have your ears wide open to what is said and also not said. And I think that will stand you in really good stead.
I just want to follow up on that, Priscilla, because it reminds me very much of one of the teachings of an elder I worked with. She was always taught as a child. She said, you use these and these before you use this. And that's good advice for all of us. A lot of us are anxious to find out things, and we sometimes ask too many questions right away. And it's far better to sort of allow the information that people want to share with you to come to you, rather than trying to always be focusing in on what you want to know right away. And I can't tell you how many times when I have asked a question of someone and the response has been something very different from what I had anticipated. And I thought, oh, they didn't hear the question properly. And then all of a sudden they come around and they answer the question in a way that I never would have expected, and with much richer, more detailed, more nuanced information than I ever would have dreamed about. And so I think listening to people very carefully and learning what they want out of the relationship, you are serving them, you're serving their community. At least that's the way I look at it as a researcher. And what you want to do is to follow their advice, their wishes, and their direction when you're doing your research.
Great, thank you.
I fully agree.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Go ahead.
I fully agree with Nancy and cannot agree more, because my work with communities and in the field in general has shown me that the narrative is what actually carries much more information just than answer to the question. So, and it's really, for me, the best reward in all this botanical work is when I leave the person asking stupid questions, talking about whatever comes on the person's mind, getting everything I actually want to get without really asking directly for it. But I feel the person uplifted because they realize that actually I know something about it, much more than I show out, maybe even, but that their knowledge matters to someone who already knows something. And I feel they start to value what they know even more. And I think this is the most important mission of us in the field, for people to understand that local knowledge is important, and that they need to carry it on, that they need to give it to their children, that this is something valuable for the world and for themselves.
Great, thank you. I think, Sonia, you're the only one we haven't heard from. Do you have anything you'd like to add in for this one? Oh, you're on mute though.
Yeah. I have no glowing stories about hanging off the edge of a cliff or having my donkey caravan behind me. But as has been said by all, we always have to be creative and respond to challenges. And though the question is talking about the past, I think that what we're experiencing now in the future is quite clearly of how we all had to change, and we've had to look inward, reshape our focus. And one of my real concerns is that the loss of empowerment by our people during this pandemic. And that is something that I would like young ethnobotanists to think about very carefully. If you're entering into new projects, you've got projects that you've started, is to look at how you can reshape those so that you empower your community to respond to stressful situations like what many of us are currently experiencing. So for me, it is a matter of looking at where you are and quickly retooling and reshaping to make more of a difference relative to what you had been doing.
Wonderful, thank you. Before we move on to our next kind of big question, I want to quickly touch on something Priscilla mentioned about COVID burnout. This is obviously something all of you are also experiencing in different forms and intensities. So please remember that as part of our student council initiatives for this year, we're hoping to bring student mental health to the forefront. So keep in mind that if you ever need help with anything along those lines, you can get in touch with us. And we're not therapists, but we'll do our best to help you find the resources that you need. Also, your supervisors are a great source, and most universities have mental health services. So please keep that in mind going forwards. Now, our next question for the panelists is, has the pandemic revealed any areas of ethnobotanical research that require urgent attention? How can these be addressed? Once again, I'm going to throw this in the chat box for everyone. And if someone would like to start us off, please.
I can kick us off. From my perspective, I think it's an interesting time, not only for urgent attention to practices around the use of medicinal plants for COVID and COVID symptoms, but also to the changing dynamics of our food systems. Especially in the beginning of the pandemic, people were forced to be at home for a long period. In some cases, they, really had to shift away from a habit of eating out in restaurants, of having all these prepared foods, and especially in very urban environments where you're on the go and you're not really engaged in the kitchen. And so I've been very curious about how this has changed human relationships, not only to our foods and the preparation of our foods, but also to the ingredients that we consume. And I think this is an area that ethnobotanists are exceptionally well equipped to investigate, both in urban and rural settings. And the second area I think that's worth investigation is this shift towards, or attempted shift, I should say, towards self-reliance and gardening. We reached a point last spring in the United States where you could not find vegetable seeds anywhere. If you went to the local hardware store to buy tomato cages or gardening tools, they were completely sold out. There was a huge and unexpected boom in people trying to return back to that tradition of gardening. But at the same time, I would hypothesize that many might have been hindered by the lack of traditional knowledge regarding how to garden, because many people don't even know what a tomato plant looks like. They may know what the fruit looks like, but not the actual plant. So these are some areas I could imagine where ethnobotany students could really undertake some really interesting surveys. And again, because of our ability to connect with populations through the internet, there might be other ways to do this beyond, just doing in-person interviews. There might be other ways to reach populations. And I believe Renata shared an article where she had a team that she led to actually survey people's food habits that was posted in the chat. And that's a great starting point to kind of build out this area of research. Maybe she can follow up on that.
Cassie, it was not about the food, it was about home medicine.
Yes, home. I thought it was
Home
medicinal
food
foods,
medicine,
food
in
medicines.
this
Yeah.
sense, yes.
Mhm.
But yeah, this is definitely a important subject to approach, and which could probably help not only from the current COVID perspective, but thinking more widely about food security and the availability of food close to person's home, in the sense, and maybe not in wealthy regions, but in Ukraine, for example, there were food shortages and interruptions in supply, and also in Estonia, where I'm from, there was kind of panic moment when Poland closed the borders and the trucks were not coming through, and it was at the very beginning of the lockdown in Europe in the winter. So the individual and also community food security is should be priority also on the policy level, but this is something we could start to influence. I fully agree with you on that.
Just to add, in New Zealand, food security has been huge. So we've had enormous discussions nationally about food security, but the importance for local communities. So again, food knowledge and empowering our communities to produce food. Thinking about traditional varieties of food has come up. The history of food cultivation in communities has also been a topic for discussion. We've got some amazing stories, for example, and again, these are in digital archives on the web as well. So just to go back to that, around, for example, Whakaotirangi, who was one of the first women to arrive in New Zealand, who was famous for her gardens and her cultivations that provided for her people. So we've had a lot of discussion around food security and food sovereignty. That's been critical. The other thing I think that ethnobiologists are also very well placed to think about is the relationships that we have with nature. So this has arisen as a critical problem right across conservation biology. So how do we encourage and grow relationships with nature? So here there's been a lot of discussion about inequalities in terms of during lockdown, our access to natural spaces. So this is something that an ethnobiologist might be interested in. So our poorest communities tend to have very few green spaces or places to go for recreation, but also for collecting or harvesting plants, of course. So these are issues that have all come up on the radar. And I think because we straddled the sort of science, conservation, biodiversity, and people being at the heart of our work, this is really, we're really well placed to actually contribute to these areas of research.
I guess Sonia has her hand up next.
Okay, you want to go, Nancy, or should I go?
You go ahead, Sonia.
Yeah, so this is the type of project work that I speak about, food and nutrition security for health. Actually, it's a webinar that I was approached by a young IT entrepreneur to put together a webinar for a broader public. I think that this is something that ethnobotanists need to do, because there are wider questions out there and lots of misinformation. And from our scientific perspective, I think we have a responsibility to share knowledge and not keep it within smaller communities, but expose it to as larger communities as possible. This is something, this is an IT entrepreneur, but the body of young ethnobotanists we have here can be innovative in terms of developing knowledge packages so that we share, our knowledge with a wider community that can be impactful for a period just like this. And just as the rest of many questions in terms of how can we respond within the home at the community level in terms of the treatment of COVID symptoms. And there's a lot of myths there about what plants are, applicable and how you use those plants. And I think that as ethnobotanists, we have a global responsibility to share information and mechanisms like what we're doing here today. I would recommend, the young people get together as groups and do more of this in light of the absence of going out into the field and having that more intimate experience.
I'll just jump in here with a few more ideas. I think some of the major problems that we face in the world are related to these very questions about food security, but we also are very aware of climate change, for example, and the role that fossil fuels are having, and deforestation, what I call homogenization in the world of where we're tending to bring species from one place to another all around the globe, and especially European species coming into, as Priscilla will know, into New Zealand and Australia and Canada and so forth. And these are all issues of importance to economic botanists. I think biocultural diversity and crop diversity is also important. And we've been losing a lot of the crop diversity as food production goes global instead of remaining local. So I think the ideas of bringing our food systems back home and producing food locally as much as possible, at the same time preserving our forest communities and working with local Indigenous people to have Indigenous-led conservation of our local areas. I think all of these are approaches that students can participate in, can help, can learn about, and can lead.
Wonderful, thank you. We'll get to student questions in a little bit. I see a few people waving their hands. We have about 14 more minutes. We have a few more questions for the panelists, and then we'll get to students. Our next panel question that we have prepared is, how can remote interviews making use of newly popularized technologies, such as Zoom, be used in ethnobotanical research? But then also, we would like to talk about social media and if it's a legitimate platform for scientific engagement, especially for ethnobotany. So if anyone has some thoughts on these two matters.
I'll speak about whether it's a legitimate platform for scientific engagement, and then we can distill ethnobotanical study. I mean, it has been mentioned by the panelists already, the opportunities for using social media. And I can share that I was recently part of a program in Germany, which is called Falling Walls. And we're looking for the breakthrough, different levels of breakthrough in science. And science engagement was the one in which I participated. And I simply utilized my strategies employed over my nonprofit and made it into the finals. Interestingly, who won for science engagement, and I'm using this as a model, was a vision impaired scientist who utilized models that fellow impaired young scientists could hold in their hand to experience the fascination with planetary, and he won that because of the sensitivity towards his innovation and how he reached his target population. And this is what I think social media can do for our young botanists. Again, there are two levels here. There's engagement in terms of knowledge and empowering your public and communities. And then the question is whether you can do important quantitative analysis using social media. I will not, or I will confess that I am not as into and somewhat of a novice in terms of the platforms out there, but I expect individual would know of the opportunities where you can target in terms of demographics, whether it's age, gender, previous knowledge, in terms of designing an instrument that you can get to that target group, allowing you to do some analytical research. I would say for me, qualitative, yes, it is a definite in terms of the value of social media. As a quantitative model, I think we have to be very careful about the instruments we design so that we can speak to the veracity of that data that is collected. So it's interesting to think about that. I know we've mentioned it, but anyone having actual examples where they've relied totally on social media for their data collection.
All right, who would like to hop in next?
I fully agree with Sonia in the sense that social media cannot be used directly maybe for a quantitative approach, but very surely for qualitative, and maybe even not that much for asking questions ourselves, but for seeing what is going on there. So we can, it's endless source of information if we just dig in a discussion group on containing 10,000 people discussing the use of mushrooms or wild food plants or medicinal whatever healing practice. So of course we cannot identify plants and mushrooms in it, but we can see so many different other aspects which are as important as identifying the species. So, and from there is always a way for future research in the field or in the society in general. Because one thing, as a classical ethnobotany is studying, of course, with indigenous population, but in Europe, our population is indigenous more or less. So, of course, maybe not that close to the forest, to the earth anymore, living in the cities, but nevertheless, the interest is there, and other aspects which we could study. The way forward is to understand how to bring the knowledge back to people and how to make them interested in using plants again and in caring for them and having respect for the plants and for the earth and for other peoples in the context. So there are really, maybe they do not sound so ethnobotanical, such research approaches, but they are actually related to ethnobotany, and they might exploring something out of the field might help you later in the field as well.
Actually, I'd like to talk a little bit about some things that have been happening in New Zealand that might give you some ideas. I'm not sure. And this might be in part because New Zealand's a relatively small country, so there's only 5 million of us. So, and we often tend to be very connected as a group. But we've had some really popular social media events that I think are relevant to ethnobiology. So every year we have something called the Garden Bird Survey. And you can do this digitally now. It used to be on paper. It's been running for more than 10 years. And so it's once a year. Everybody goes out into their garden and they observe whatever birds they see in their garden over an hour. So you can pick any day during, it's in a particular week, and you simply observe, pick a bit of your garden and you watch to see the birds. And of course, many people aren't very familiar with birds. So there's usually a little campaign leading up to it with pictures of birds, and there's a place that you can click on where it's got pictures of birds, all the common birds that you might see in your garden with their names. And so you fill out a form. And so people have been doing this. We have thousands of people who do this every year, and a lot of kids as well. And there are colouring competitions and all sorts of different ways of communicating. But we do actually gather and analyse the data from that bird survey. And it's about, we can interrogate that data to ask questions about people's familiarity with different kinds of birds. And we can see patterns in different parts of the country, for example. So it's a really good example, I think, of how you can use social media to create something that's both popular and valuable and also grows knowledge in our communities. We've also got what they call the Great Kereru Count, which is an enormous pigeon, great big fat chonky looking thing, where people do the same. They count pigeons in that week. And we also did something on social media in association with that. What we did was we set up little quizzes with a picture of a bird and a simple multi-choice answer. So we'd say in both, and we did it in both English and in Māori, the Indigenous language, where we said, what is this bird? Great big picture, and then that people had 4 choices, and then they answered and they could see whether they were right or wrong. So it was a tool really to improve people's knowledge of birds again. But again, and it was very simple. There were 10 pictures, so only 10 birds. And again, we do this every year, but you can see how you can build up different kinds of data sets that are really relevant to ethnobotany or ethnobiology, and create relationships with the community around this. So I would encourage people to think really creatively about social media. Some of you I know will have enormous numbers of followers on Twitter or Facebook, and you can use these as a tool potentially to grow relationships around ethnobiology. So think about whether, I've also got a PhD student actually who's studying urban kaitiakitanga, which is Indigenous principles of stewardship, but within cities, and thinking about what that looks like. So she created a digital survey that she could ask people. She sent out the link on social media, and she had around 300 or 350 people respond, and fantastic responses in terms of so she can understand more about for Indigenous people who live outside of their traditional homelands, how they develop and grow and experience relationships with nature in cities. That's the focus of what she's doing. So amazing work. So I think that there are ways that you can really use social media if you can think a bit creatively about that. So yeah, I'd say have discussions with your supervisor, but I know that some of you will be very technology savvy, and you may know of things that we can't even conceive of. So please, do put your heads to work. This is a really exciting area, I think.
I'm not very into the digital age, really, but I can see that, as I think Cassie mentioned, a lot of younger people around the world, including Indigenous people, people in local communities, people in cities, a lot of younger people, this is the way they get their information, this is the way they learn, and that could be put to amazing use when it comes to doing research, because if you develop some kind of communication with younger people in a community, they can do their own digital essays, they can do photographs, they can develop information, bodies of information, co-develop with you. And everybody does the research together in a sense. As long as it's done with, careful ethical guidelines, it's a way of co-production of knowledge that is allowed by this amazing digital age that we're in.
I want to just bring up one other tool that I just discovered. It's been out for a long time, but I just started playing with it on my vacation this holiday with my children. We were out hiking, and there is a program called iNaturalist. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this, but it's a lot of fun to engage with. And as I was playing with this, I was really amazed by how good it actually is at getting IDs on plants. And it's basically, you have consensus based on other users of the platform that will give suggestions of, actually, no, maybe it's this species. And so you have a kind of discussion. It's almost like a game that people play. And I wonder if there are ways that we could use tools like iNaturalist in our research. And perhaps someone has already done this in ethnobotany. I'm just not aware of it. But this could be another tool, because I think one of the biggest challenges in going to a social media based platform or a remote survey based platform is, how do we substantiate evidence? Evidence in terms of having biological voucher specimens, whether it is of wild fungi or wild plants or cultivars. We need those herbarium specimens. We need some way to ensure that we have the correct species identification. Because remember, in many cultures, you may have, and including in the English language, one common name might actually refer to many, many different scientific names, and not even within the same genus. Sometimes it can refer to things across families. So it's really important, as you gather this electronic data, to have some way of validating and authenticating which species people are actually referring to. And I've thought about this potential utility of iNaturalist for this role, but there may be other platforms or other ways, but just kind of keep that in mind if you do pursue this path of more of a remote virtual engagement with the community. Have a way to actually authenticate whatever specimens that they're mentioning. And I'll put the link here online for you.
Well, I think in some way we are rediscovering the past at the end of 19th century, at least in Europe, especially in the Baltic states. There were many calls for people to collect the knowledge, to answer specific questionnaires, and also to send the herbarium specimens. And actually, well, we are repeating it with modern means. And maybe we can use photo for that as a proof. Cassie, what do you think? As one option, but also, well, people actually like to be engaged, and it could be that people would be happy to send herbarium specimens. Well, Baiba, who is a member of my team and is here also on the platform as a student, is working on the citizen science, and this is a very cool subject right now, but this is actually nothing new and has been there already for centuries. So people actually know a lot, and they can contribute to science in a co-creation manner. They have done it already before. And it's all about the question how to motivate people to contribute and to value their contribution. So.
Wonderful, thank you. I think we've heard from all of you now regarding that. And since we're entering our last half hour, we're going to hop into student questions. I actually have two that have already been sent in from students. So if anyone else has those questions, I've seen a few hands up. If you could type them in the chat box and send them to me, maybe that would be the quickest way for us to do this. So our first one was, I am wondering how we as field researchers can achieve a sort of understanding or sensitivity to a field site or community when we cannot go. So for example, doing research over the internet through social media, how can we really come to understand these people and the place they're living? Anyone want to start us off
Well,
there?
I mean, I would start in the same way I would start before any field expedition. I mean, you have to put in the work in the library, right? You really need to read, become as familiar with the literature around that culture, around that region, around the botany of the area, as much as possible as a starting point. If you can engage through social media, maybe perhaps it's easier if you already have an established field site. Like I stay in contact with communities I've collaborated with in Albania and Kosovo using platforms like Facebook. And it's a lot of fun because I get to see when they have their different celebrations throughout the year and they're bringing out these plants and they're, all these rituals that I've heard about, but maybe wasn't able to be there in person during that period of the year. We get to see through this. So I'm not sure about how to establish this if it's a new community that you're working with, but regardless, the starting place always has to be with building an in-depth understanding of what has already been written on the topic.
Yeah, just to what Cass has said. If it's a new community, reach out to your mentors. There's a wealth of, capacity out there. So reach out to mentors and have them establish a conduit for you to begin to develop a relationship. It's going to be the challenge for us who want to get themselves immersed in a particular area. So don't discount the possibilities, but I think reach out to the capacity that is there. If you're not a member of SCB, join SCB because there's a wealth of capacity there that could probably act as conduits for you to these new resources and people.
I'll just add to that. What Cassandra said is true. There's so much background research that you can do on a particular area. On the plants, you can do herbarium research. You can reach out to people. You can do reading. And nowadays, you can look at Google Earth and look at what the countryside is like and the forest cover is like. There's a lot that you can do. You can't do everything, obviously, and you need to be there in one way or another. But given the constraints of the particular time, if you're trying to do research in an area where you're not able to access, I think if it were me, I think I would change my a little bit and put that into a future goal to continue that particular work and find something, a related question or something that's linked to that research that you can do in this particular circumstance until things change. There's some things that we just can't do, and we have to face it and find alternatives.
I would actually recall what you, Nancy, said just a few minutes ago about letting people speak about whatever they want to speak, bringing you to answer your question over the corner. This could be also one option when you explore the region over the phone or over the Meet or Zoom meeting. So you let just people to narrate about their place, about the people. Of course, you will hear always, if you would be here, I could offer you this and we could go there and I would introduce you to this person. And this is how our Ukrainian researcher is working right now with the beekeepers. She's calling them and they are telling her a lot and giving quite intense overview, but every second sentence is, if you would have been here. But nevertheless, it's possible, it prepares you. So next time, when it's possible to go, she will know basically everything about this place, about those people. So.
Okay, great. Priscilla, do you have anything to add on this question?
I just agree with what the other panelists have said. It's really difficult to construct your own face-to-face relationships with communities at the moment, but go and talk to your mentors, as Sonia said, because your mentors will have long relationships with some people and will be able to help in that regard. And the other thing I'd just say is that communities really remember people who listen and who treat people in the community well during difficult times. And here in New Zealand, our communities are very conscious of looking after their elders. And so if you're a researcher who pays attention and gives consideration to all of the things that the community values, that will stand you in very good stead when you eventually do get to meet your community face to face.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to our next question. Are there running activities during the pandemic where ethnobotanical studies are or could help directly communities who have food security issues? Are there perhaps forms of policy support where people may have land to sustain their livelihood during these times? Who would like to start us off on this one? Does anyone know of any ongoing projects? I was going to say I don't either.
Carson, could you just repeat the question a bit?
Sorry, yes. Are there any activities during the pandemic that are involved with ethnobotanical studies that could be directly helping communities with their food security issues? Are we aware of any current projects based on food security during the pandemic that are actually kind of very applied in nature?
Yeah, well, I'm aware of a broad relation that's very early in planning, and know that it was conceptualized before we had to deal with COVID, but ever more important as we deal with the challenges, and that is the periodic table of food. We know that we're currently dependent on sources of food. I think that make up 75% documented of what we rely on. And the periodic table of food is looking to increase that 1,000, but being careful to focus on region-specific food systems. The plan is to go into regions where that capacity is needed, assisting, whether it's with research methods, agricultural methods in terms of recognizing the food resources that are indigenous to a region, if that has not already been done in an effective way. And then at the community level, engage persons in growing garden or becoming more involved in agriculture, but with the objective of, again, feeding us as now the universal challenge. We've all had that issue. I think the periodic table of food is responding at a global level. Like I said, it was previously conceptualized. One of the members of SCB, Dr. John De La Parra, happens to be the project manager within that unit. It's not only that project, but there's general projects around food systems, and the periodic table of food is coming on stream. And I think it's going to address a lot of those challenges that, regarding food and nutrition security.
Yeah, I'll just echo what Dr. Peter mentioned. I put the link up into the chat as well. And I think what's really exciting about this particular initiative is that they've really taken a holistic approach to understanding food and nutrition. And the fact that they do have a number of ethnobotanists that have been brought into the fold to try and help identify foods beyond those foods that are used in major Western consumption, but also being sure to include different foods that are important to different cultures around the globe. They're going to be taking a full metabolomics approach to understanding what actually what goes into these foods, like what the chemical makeup is, what the genetic background is, linked in with initiatives that are already ongoing around like seed banking and so on. So I think there are some exciting things. It's in its infancy right now, but this is something we can look to, I think, in the future as an important resource for food security for sure.
I'll just add one of my doctoral students has been working with coastal First Nations here in British Columbia, and she's been looking at traditional methods of management of resources like berries, and looking at what a traditional berry garden looks like. And but she also has her own garden near Victoria, and she has her own seed company. So she's been providing seeds and advice to coastal communities who are developing currently their own community gardens. And so it's not a direct research outcome or process, but it's related to her own research, and it's one way of giving back to the community that's collaborating with her.
Yeah, I'd just add here that what we've seen in New Zealand is a huge mobilisation over the last few years of local communities, sort of regathering knowledge around food and soil as well. So there was recently a book published on Indigenous soil management that was edited by Jessica Hutchings, I think, and Garth Harmsworth and others. And people are, increasingly interested in food and soil systems and, understanding food as part of a greater system as well. But I think that there's a lot of ways that we could contribute and a bit of a gap really. But yeah, we're seeing a lot of local community mobilization around food.
Okay, anyone have something else to add for this question?
I think that COVID had provoked us to think about the future in this respect. So much more, many people are open to think about growing the food themselves. Even right now, not having maybe the knowledge, but I'm coming from the society which had to grow its own food because there was nothing else otherwise available from the shop. And I'm still from the generation which is able to grow the food in the home slots or the slots given by the municipality. And this is something which actually should be promoted. I do know that here in Italy, the municipality gives to people the slots. And maybe this is our task. It's not explicitly because of COVID, but to promote it for the future development of small-scale food production or personal food production, to avoid situations like that.
Okay, thanks all of you. We only have 10 minutes left and we have 2 last questions I want to get to. So what we'll do is for the first question, we'll just ask, let's say, Sonia and Cassandra. And the second question we'll put to Nancy, Priscilla, and Renata. So for Sonia and Cassandra, what method recommendations do you have in regards to remote plant identification? So the person asking this question has said that they know about iNaturalist and similar things. but they say there are limitations to it based on biodiversity hotspots, especially in the tropics. So they're concerned about how much over the internet verification they would actually be able to do. Do the two of you have any other suggestions?
I mean, I think there's really no substitute for the actual plant specimen. So if there's any way to work with on the ground collaborators that would be willing to collect and press the plant and ship it to an herbarium, you'd have to, of course, get permits, which is what you would need in any case if you were doing field work, or perhaps they could work with the herbarium in country if they could get that to that collection. That could be one way of ensuring authentication. I absolutely agree. There are limitations with just the online identification. You really have no substitute for the actual specimen. But surely there are ways. I mean, the good news is there are lots of resources online, videos on YouTube on how to press plants. It's a really simple technique. It doesn't take much money. You need some newspaper and something heavy to smush it in. Maybe a bit of a dry area or an area to dry it would be important. But I think that you could also consider making your own instructional videos that would be tailored towards your collaborators in country in their language in a way that's accessible to them to help facilitate that. So I think there's definitely ways to work around it.
Yeah, I'm agreeing with Cass. Even use platforms that are recognized and used are not 100% in terms of the results that we do get. And in my region, we have persons asking about this all the time because this is very vital. We do have accurate plant identification. So again, this is where we stretch ourselves a bit. And I like Cassie's suggestion about, where you see the deficit, you can make an effort at trying to fill those gaps. And in instance, I am putting together a list of 60 plants. My region, stretching way back to the 1600s, as they enslaved on an island during slavery. And this is the type of responsibility that I speak to, where we see gaps, we work to fill them. But I'm not aware of anything other than what Cass has referenced, recognized. They're not 100%. So again, I say to the mentors, reach out to capacity out there to assist you, where you've got uncertainties regarding plant identification, and fill the gaps when you can.
Great, thank you. Trish, I see you have your hand up. Do you have a question related to this?
Yeah, sorry to jump in on this. I wanted to say a couple things. I do a lot with voucher specimens in the natural products industry. And I think people needing to work on archival materials need to know that very few are accurately done. And that if you're using, especially in some of the natural products chemistry journals, a lot of those are not ID'd well. And you really have to be careful about that. But you can get people to collect. I have videos about that. And the last thing I wanted to say on jumping in as a panelist that I'm not on a panel is that I do edit the newsletter, and the newsletter can accept all these kinds of questions that students have so that they approach more of the experienced members in our society. We're talking about, vegetables and things. Well, Gail Wagner's worked for years on that. So I think it's a media for you all to be able to take advantage of, and I hope to hear from you. And some people are here, are on the committee, and so please do contact us to help you in any which way and be able to publicize your requests to other members in the society. So thanks, Karsten.
So as Trish said, she works with Plants and People, the newsletter. So if you look on the website, you can find her email address there, I believe, right, Trish? Yes. So if you want to get in touch with her regarding that, please do so. So we have our last question, which we'll address to Nancy, Priscilla, and Renata. So it is about our digital and online research. So these avenues are very exciting and may hold a lot of scope for research, but they will also entail a lot of screen time. So Priscilla mentioned the importance of self-care, enabling us to think more clearly. So what else can you members recommend as an antidote for all of this screen time? Are there specific activities that you've been doing away from the screen to help get you through this tough time?
Well, I'll start off. Yeah, get outside. Even in the city, there are plants growing all over the place to look at, and a lot of beauty out there. Not just plants, but animals, insects, birds. Have a bird feeder out my window here, and we have like 1,000 siskins out on the bird feeder. Those kinds of things really raise your spirits. I have a rowboat too. We live on a little island, so I can row around the island, and I love doing that. And I always see interesting things when I'm doing that. So just get outside as much as you can during the day, during the night. Look up at the stars, watch the clouds, see the sunset. All of those things are so important and really give you a lot of energy and enjoyment. Thanks.
Okay, Priscilla or Renata?
Yeah, I'd agree with what Nancy said. When we were in our hard lockdown, the only thing that we were allowed to do actually was to exercise outside. And I made it my priority to do that for an hour every day. I walk. And one of the things I found is that it benefited my research hugely. I find that when I'm walking outside in nature or just looking around, feeling the wind, which I always like, my thinking improves. And yeah, even without consciously thinking about my research, I find it incredibly productive, and that my thinking flows a lot better. And so I actually went into lockdown thinking I'm not going to set myself any work goals for that period, for that essentially 6 weeks. My entire goal was to walk for an hour every day. And it turned out to be much more productive than I anticipated, just from the effects flowing on from that. So yeah, I'd completely agree with Nancy and say self-care, and if you can, creating different kinds of relationships with nature is incredibly helpful.
I absolutely agree with you both. And I'm here in Italy, I miss the nature the most, because back in Estonia, I had the closest neighbor was 1 kilometer away. So I was able to walk. I would be able now to walk without the mask. Here in Italy, the mask is compulsory. And there are too many people, you cannot just, you can bump in any way on your way. But to add to that, I would suggest to bring as much as possible of the thinking work and designing work on the paper. So do not write the map or do not write your scratches in the computer, but do it on paper. It actually helps a lot also to start, because sometimes we spend behind the computer just empty time trying to word to start an article or development of the thought, but do it on the paper saves your eyes a lot.
Wonderful, thank you.
Old good paper.
And I just want to add one more thing, and that is, there's plants that you can have relationships with indoors as well. And so you probably can see I've got a lot of plants here, and they're great company as well.
Wonderful, thank you all. So we've reached the end of our event. I'd like to thank all of the panelists for coming. You guys were wonderful. So for all of the students out there, these are some of the big names in the field. So we should all be very, very happy that they gave us their time today. So thank you guys a lot for that. Again, if you have any questions related to the event, the society, student memberships, feel free to email me. I put my email in the chat earlier, and it's also on the website under the student council section. Kim, if you'd like to add anything. She's the one who came up with the idea for this event, and she's been wonderful. Oh, Paul, sorry, I see you have a question.
Actually, it's not a question, it's just to express our gratitude from Kenya for being brought on board. Now you have the Kenyan chapter of the Society of Economic Botany. Our vice president is also on board. I don't know whether she wants to say a word. That is Catherine Lukoba. I don't know whether she wants to mention something, but currently we are the sum of the two officials in Society of Economic Botany here in Kenya. And we are trying also to catch up with you. And this has been a wonderful forum, very, very good. And I'm delighted to be part of it. And we were just chatting with Catherine before we started that this would be a good forum for us to connect. Maybe the next meeting, we also hear what Kenya can tell you what we are doing here. I've been delighted to hear so much about Italy, about New Zealand, so we can hear about the world from our own homes. And this is quite exciting. So apart from pandemic controlling us and confining us to our homes, it has also expanded us. Now we can come to your homes without paying, without an air ticket. We just come and we talk to one another. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I don't know whether Catherine would like to say something or she's still off or on, I don't know.
Hi, everybody. I just want to say how, pleased I am to have, been able to join this forum and also to meet some of the people I met a number of years back and of course, new people. Thank you very much for this. It's a very good idea. And I think Paul and I are going to replicate it also for our students. Thank you.
Wonderful. I'm glad to hear it. Thank you both for your thoughts. Kim, do you have anything to say to close us out?
No, but if anybody else is doing other online events, please do let us know. We can always share those events for you through our social media and website. But thank you so much to our really amazing panelists. We're so honoured that you were able to come and give us your wise words today. Thank you very much. Hope everybody stays well and happy.
Great.
Thanks everyone.
Again, anyone needs anything related to the society, you're welcome to email me. You're not bothering me. I get a lot of emails where people are worried they're being a pain, but you're not. So great. That's it for today. Thank you all so much for coming.
Bye.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Kim.
Bye, and thank you to everyone, especially for the
Thank you
organizers.
so much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, we appreciate you all coming very much.
Thank you. Thank you. You'll send us the tape, will you?
Yeah, so this is all being video recorded, which will be sent out. And we also will have the chat recorded and we'll send that out with it.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you
no
so much.
problem. Thank you
It
very
was
much.
lovely to see you, Paul.
Thank you so much to see you too. I've just been seeing your name in the correspondence, Kim.
Aha, well, I'm hoping that we will see you again at other events as well.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you. Good night.
Oh, good night.
Goodbye, everyone.